Travis Wayne Goodsell. There was a video months ago where I brought up that I had done a video but refused to post it on YouTube because it was too dark. And then Bill Mayer came out on his show predicting 2024. And the news covered him. There's problems with Bill Mayer's predictions for 2024 that I did eventually cover in follow-up videos to his show. And one of the problems that Americans face is that we forget our history. Not just America's history, but world history. In Nazi Germany, hopefully everybody knows about the human experimentation done on the Jews. It wasn't just an internment camp. It was a torture chamber, which, yes, eventually Prescott Bush's gas was used to exterminate the Jews in Auschwitz, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. My German, I don't have... It's more of a harsh masculine rather than the petite feminine of French. And the Nuremberg trials went for the officers and for the medical doctors. And the psychologists, for the most part, psychiatrists, psychologists, all those in that field, were given asylum in America. But the American Psychiatric Association at least adheres to the Nuremberg decision. At least openly and in their manual. There were many who escaped prosecution and punishment for what they did. As I've been hearing the last several years about those who had gotten away getting caught finally. What was done to the Jews was inhumane, to say the least. They were treated as subhuman. They were treated as mentally ill. That's what the concentration camps were. They were asylums. Many Jews were declared having schizophrenia to justify the torture and human experimentation, where the medical doctors would do all sorts of physical tortures, cuttings of the body, burning, freezing, taking out parts of the brain, electroshock therapy to wipe the brain clean and reboot it, and many others. Not just hysterectomies of women. And for people who think that it was all just a hoax, you realize they are the enemy. Anybody who claims that the concentration camps in Nazi Germany were a hoax are the enemy. But then to read this morning from the Jerusalem Post that America, on an asylum on Long Island, had already been doing that to Jews before World War II, and then into World War II. For those who were Holocaust survivors, they were locked away there, never to be heard of again. See, I'd caught on that McCarthy, Senator McCarthy, with his Red Scare tactic, was a distraction so that he could promote the resurrection of fascist Nazi Germany in America. He created the enemy in the form of communism, not fully educating America on correct definitions and historical information, as it was just a scare tactic to distract from his agenda. And though many realized that what he had done was wrong, he had, in effect, succeeded. Because both communism and fascism, in whatever form it's called, are both inhumane governments. And we have them, we just call them by different party names. But it was psychologists who educated these politicians on how to do that kind of mental manipulation on the masses. Because it wasn't just in Long Island. I'm sure many of you have heard that our government used to use the movie theaters when they would have little news segments and commercials. Well, they would put in frames of popcorn and Coca-Cola, and I'm not sure when Coca-Cola stopped putting cocaine in it, but nonetheless, they were trying to see if they could get the masses to desire popcorn and Coca-Cola, to purchase them at the concession stand. And so isn't it interesting how expensive they are at the movie theaters, and how they, at least at one point in time, were militaristic on denying customers from bringing in outside concessions. If you want people to buy it, make it so that it's affordable, so that it's inconvenient to bring it in from elsewhere. It's a simple thing, but instead they make it complicated. But it was psychologists that were behind all that. Companies hire psychologists. McDonald's, why do you think they have commercials the way they do? Why do you think they color their buildings the way they do? Why do you think it's run the way it's run? It's all because of psychologists who tell them what to do to manipulate the brains of humans, their customers. And so, how many of you, for example, believe that pink is a girl's color and blue is a boy's color? Yeah, psychologists put that in your head. You've been brainwashed. There is no such thing as male or female objects. Now, yes, ancient languages used male and female suffix determinatives, grammatical terminations, to identify particular objects. But it's not real. It's not Mother Earth and Father Sky, or Mother Sky and Father Earth. You know, the motherland, the fatherland. That's all brainwashing techniques to elicit an emotional response. And we see that being played out all across this nation, as people are led to believe their emotions cause things. Their emotions cause them to believe, cause them to act. Emotions are a response. They are the consequence of how you believe and interpret what happens. And so for a newborn baby, they will see a picture of a person in a black robe, you know, with an inverted pentagram around his neck as a bling chain. Baby does not know what that is. And so a baby doesn't all of a sudden go into a fear panic mode. Oh no, my life is in danger. We have to be taught. And part of our teaching is from experience. And so if your experience produces positive, happy feelings, you do not recognize the threat. And people know this and use it against mankind for both methods, to cause fear and to cause deception, thinking that all is well in Zion. In one of the videos I did this morning, I talked about Utah's concentration camp and Omar, who was murdered by a Mormon, returned missionary, was there because he had murdered his wife because she was of the devil. The United States did away with that, because that was what the Salem witch trials were all about. They're witches, therefore they're of the devil, therefore we need to burn them at the stake and hang them, lock them up in prison. So the First Amendment is supposed to protect that, whether women are witches or not. It becomes a ridiculous accusation. Nonetheless, apparently I found out that asylums began in the United States in 1885. And of course, Utah has their asylum. And they weren't places where medical doctors went. It was for human experimentations, like I told you. The undesirable, the ones nobody knew about, had connections with, those who were disagreeable in society, were all locked up in there, and human experimentation commenced. It was President John F. Kennedy who signed the act to do away with asylums. That those who have legitimate mental illnesses, which he sort of blew it on that, are to be taken care of, not tortured. If there is a problem in the brain, a medical doctor can take care of that at a real hospital. But that's why Utah has now what's called the Utah State Hospital. It's Utah's concentration camp for human experimentation and torture. Omar was there because he couldn't speak English well, and he was merely accused of a crime. And you do not go to trial. You go straight to the concentration camp. Now there are others who are either plead guilty by insanity or are found innocent but mentally ill, or guilty but mentally, something like that. It's a ridiculous terminology. It all needs to be done away with. Those guys also get locked up there. You're familiar with Brian David Mitchell. That's what Utah did to him. He was going to be there for the rest of his life, removed from society, never to be heard of or seen from again. He and Wanda Barzee also. But because Senator Hatch knew Mr. Smart, or Brother Smart, so the Mormon Church is now involved. His Mormon family that Elizabeth belonged to. Brian David Mitchell was Mormon, but he was excommunicated. And we're in the state of Utah. Warren Hatch, he's Mormon too. So they wanted to make sure he was in prison. And so federal charges commenced. And what do you know? There is a cure for mental illness. Psychologists all say there is no cure. Nobody gets cured. It's a lifelong thing. They have to remain their client for their whole life. And what do you know? The first case of curing of mental illness. And now he's in prison. Psychology is a fraud. They are able to deceive and manipulate people through the use of fallacy arguments. That's how they do it. That's their secret magic trick. They tell you you have a problem and that only they can fix it. They groom you. And they groom the masses. That's the whole point and purpose. And everywhere in your life has been infiltrated by psychos. As I only gave you just one example of colors. And I guess emotions. But that's the goal, is to deceive you into thinking your emotions are what drives you, motivates you. No, it's your beliefs. How you interpret your experiences. And that's what psychologists do. When there's a tragedy, they bring in the psychos so that they brainwash you or re-educate you as to what happened. Because they learned from Stockholm Syndrome, where the guy went in, held hostages at the bank for several days. And the hostages began empathizing with their captor. And that's how they realized how to control the masses. They keep you in trauma, but tell you to reprocess it. Because the criminals often get away, don't they? Not necessarily with a school shooting, unless they lock them up either in prison or in an asylum called a hospital with fake doctors. But in our government, in our businesses, in our religions, everybody uses those techniques and tactics on those who will participate. And so yes, the 2020 election, I finally was forced to vote because I don't want either candidate. Both are compromised. Both are trying to harm America. Both are not following the Constitution. Nonetheless, because of the more severe threat, I was forced to go for the lesser threat. That's their whole plot and plan. Extortion. Forcing a decision as we are the hostages. We are the victims. And if you support them, you're just like those hostages. So today I'm going to be watching the Hunger Games series. Already saw the first one. There's other movies, but this one has a series. See, I remember back in the 80s, there was the fear of the Illuminati. I had no idea what they were. Had no idea I was a part of it. The Great and Abominable Church. I didn't know because I had been fooled from birth. See, for me, they kept it hidden. Out of sight, out of mind. That's what my mom raised me to believe. As I was kept out of sight. So that I would be out of her mind. And that's what the church has done. So that only those who get married now and go to the wedding photo shoot now get to see it. Because they put up a wall. Right about the time when it was getting exposed. The photos had been released. And I found out from my own wedding photos. Our Relief Society president at the time told us, I made sure to get the whole door in. Most people don't get the whole door. I made sure to get the whole door in too. I had no idea what you meant. I'm not looking up. But it was a bombshell in my lawsuit that I was denied filing. But it's on the public record nonetheless. And so there are people who were locked away in Utah's asylum, even hospital, who are innocent, who never got an opportunity to have their day in court to prove their innocence. And we're not supposed to prove our innocence. The accuser is supposed to prove our guilt. But that's how Utah does it. We are the enemy if we do not conform and comply. So when the Black Lives Matter protests occurred also in Utah, Governor Herbert called them domestic terrorists and justified it because of the looting, the damage, and the cop car being burned. Instead of going, hey guys, I understand, we will make sure that we will be good, that we will treat you good. Nope. He pulled authoritarianism on us, fascism, and turned us into the enemies. That it's a crime to protest. It's a crime to petition the government for a redress of grievances. It's a crime to have free speech. Seeing a pattern? Authoritarians and communism, they both don't want a constitutional republic because that takes away their power. They have to conform and comply to the Constitution on our behalf. And they don't want that. And so in the 80s, you heard about the church being involved in electroshock conversion therapy. The church denies it. The victims say otherwise. But also, I was hearing the scare tactics of a potential threat of martial law being declared by a corrupt president who would lock us all up. And then it was back in Obama's administration. People were saying that Walmarts were being bought out by the government and being used to store military vehicles and other military equipment. And that people were making the connection, oh, Walmart spelled backwards is martial law. Well, under Trump, we found out exactly what some of those Walmarts were used for. The overflow of locking up refugees and asylum seekers at the southern border. And even that was not enough, as they then had to have tent cities built up as well. There were concentration camps. It's not detention centers. It's not internment camps, as Utah calls their Japanese internment camp an internment camp. It was a concentration camp. They had the hospital, which was an asylum, and they had internment camps. They didn't have one for Germans. Isn't that interesting? And so it's not something that we should just downplay. Oh, yeah, they were temporarily housed until the war was over. No, they were stripped of all their rights. They were stripped from their homes, their communities, their families. Although their families pretty much were with them. I still remember Rachel Maddow when she first got the news right at the end of her show, breaking about little infant babies being locked in cages separated from their nursing mothers. And so, yeah, when China retaliates against America because Biden says, well, we're protesting your abuse of that one community. China responded, you guys have done it. You have no claim to tell us what we can or can't do. China's right, but China's also wrong, because we're both wrong. Nobody should be doing this to humans. And so Biden needs to fix it in America. We shouldn't be going anywhere. We need to fix the problems in America first and foremost. But nobody does. Because this controls the masses. So where are the protests? Cops are still shooting unarmed black people. Where are the protests? Oh, they got silenced. In Oregon, National Guard brought in. In Michigan, back in the 60s or 70s, I think it was the 70s, because I think I saw it on the news as a kid. National Guard was brought in because the Ford Motor Company employees, who were mostly black, went on strike. And so there was a little war there, all because of the mistreatment of the employees in Detroit. And so it spread beyond because it escalated. That's what we saw here in Utah with the Black Lives Matter protesters. It escalated. I saw the news coverage in the background of the militarized police shoving the old man down. And then, of course, ABC4 News Utah downplayed it after they said, oh, we caught it live. They cut out the part of what the officer did right before he then pushed him to the ground. You see his intent to push him to the ground. You see that the old man was not considered a threat, that he was identified as an elderly man. And yet this officer, nonetheless, went out of his way to shove him to the ground. And that's the different one from the other man who was shoved down and had a head injury, was bleeding all over the ground as the officers walked on by. The elderly man refused to sue, as all Mormons refused to sue the government, refused to sue the police, refused to sue the church, they're all scared for their lives. We just had another police murder where the officer isn't going to be charged. Right here in Utah. And the Attorney General says, I'm stuck. I can't do anything. The laws say they can't do that. Article 6 says any laws made in violation of the Constitution can't do that. So he's just giving excuses to protect the cops. Again, we have never followed the Constitution in America. Thomas Jefferson ruined it by having the first party government. It was like the Democrat Republicans or something like that. And now we've got them as a split party that are running this nation. But these are the distractions. And certain masters of this know how to manipulate us. And throwing out shiny keys that do need to be dealt with so that other things can then creep in. Because, for example, the concentration camps. They're going to establish martial law and then we'll all be locked up in concentration camps and we'll be re-educated and tortured, just like in Nazi Germany. They're already doing it. That's the thing. They get people to spread the fear that it will happen in the future if certain things are not opposed when they're already doing it. And so the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, yeah, it's all great and fun that I show that Dallin H. Oaks gave the Aaronic priesthood back in October 2018 the Heil Hitler. Oh, isn't it fun that Travis exposed Dallin H. Oaks again for doing the double Heil Hitler this year? That's not what I'm doing, guys. His thinking process, his beliefs, and thus his actions are Nazi. His Heil Hitler captures are just the outward sign. So when he goes up and talks about religious freedom, it's a distraction to mentally manipulate you. Oh yeah, freedom, religion, yeah, two great words that sound great together. Not to discourage Reese's Pieces. That's actually good. Assuming your body can handle the sugar. But when you listen to him, he talks about overthrowing our government, overthrowing the Constitution to protect the church. That's what he means by religious freedom. He's changing definitions to deceive. And so when Nelson speaks, I immediately, well, it took a little while, I immediately recognized what he was saying, but I didn't realize it was a death threat to me yet. Because you have to read between the lines. See, Mormons, they hear something different because they believe differently. The church has successfully brainwashed Mormons. Those that are left. But even ex-Mormons still have the Mormon brainwashing baggage. And there's a certain psychologist involved, as psychologists help the church prophets say what they say in the manner in which they say it. And so Oakes knows exactly what he's doing when he goes out and announces he's a bigot, a racist, a sexist, hates the poor. Because what happens? Oh yeah, the particular group gets offended and tries to give him counseling. But he never speaks with them. It's always a member of the 70. See, the problems in our society, with our government, with our economy, with religion, are caused by those in charge. And so how many of you refuse to marry a guy or a girl because of poverty, because of education, because you're not established in a career? See how the church was manipulating Mormons through all that transition in the economy? Trying to keep Mormons to still have the woman at home, barefoot, pregnant in the kitchen. Keeping women suppressed, silenced, away from the feminist movement. While at the same time, men are struggling to take care of a family. We still have minimum wage at $7.50. And they deceive you into thinking, well, there's others who are making more than that. You've been deceived. You got led away with a shiny key away from the cause. And so likewise with the church. All the church does charity. See, they gave a token truckload to a ravaged city of millions. You get distracted. Oh, I know a person in my ward who gets food assistance. You've been distracted. That just got exposed last week. Church welfare fraud with the state. Because who runs the government? Mormons do. Thus the church does. This is why nobody can sue in Utah. Nobody can file a complaint. Because nobody will come to the aid of the victim. That's why thousands of rape kits were just tossed aside. Thousands in just one city. They don't care about you. That's what I'm trying to get through to you. They don't care if you live or if you die. But they do demand loyalty. They do demand obedience. And so as long as you're committing felonies for them, you get away with it. But once you go rogue and think, well, if I can commit felonies, I can satisfy my own personal desires. Yeah, well, we see what happens to those people, don't we? They're the ones that make the news, whereas the others get away for their crimes. All of it comes from psychologists. And their intention is to destroy. Psychologists were in that little black book of membership names of the secret combination in America that I broke my silence to see if I can get away with it. Because again, YouTube is in on it. They're there to suppress the truth. They're there to keep this video to as little views as possible. And so as you know, the church has destroyed me. We're coming on 24 years now. The anniversary of when the church first filed in their secret, sacred filing of troublemakers. 36434 is my number. The church finally destroyed me. And so this is one of my last warning voices for you. And there are already those who are brainwashed to be the enemy for them, to do their dirty work. YouTube is doing the church's dirty work. The cyber terrorists are doing the church's dirty work. The church doesn't have to do anything. They get to claim, oh, we're innocent. I caught them paying one of my assassins. That was the first lawsuit I filed. And I was denied because you can't sue the church. Still have the evidence, but hey, if I'm completely silenced finally, history gets covered up again. So my videos are a lot more vital than you realize, because it's the true history of the church. Their crimes, their corruptions, their terrorist activities, their seditions, their inhumanity. It's all right there on the keystone of the doors of the Salt Lake Temple.